Hello, good morning, or good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is you're watching this. Today I'm going to be doing a little video about how to make a relationship chart. I'm going to have a couple examples going across the screen right now as I'm speaking, if I do my editing well. So a relationship chart is something that I have created in order to establish characters' relationships with each other. For the most part, I use this for books, whether it's books that I'm reading or books that I'm writing. But theoretically, you could also do it for, television or movies or plays or pretty much any piece of media involving different characters. You could even do it for real-life historical figures if you wanted to, or, whatever. So the chart is essentially outlining who the characters are and their relationships with each other. So this is supposed to help you remember who each person is in the context of the story, to make sure that the relationship can be understood by a reader. If you're, a writer doing this for your characters in your story, it can be helpful to, make it clear for the reader. So it's supposed to also help to identify any role overlaps if you're a writer, again, or identify any under-involved characters who you can either, make more important by making more connections with them with other characters, or just cut out of the story altogether. The charts essentially look like the examples that I've been showing. I'm going to be doing an example of it in just a short while, but sometimes charts can be really simple. Sometimes they can be a lot more complex, with, it just involves the amount of characters that you have and what their relationships are and the complexity of your story and all things like that. I also like to color code. I don't know how well they've shown up in my scans here, but color coding the different kinds of relationships can be useful, like, using a light blue line to indicate sibling relationships, or a pink one for love, something like that. The chart that I'm doing today, I'm just going to do something pretty simple and hopefully pretty universally known. I'm going to make a chart showing the relationships in The Great Gatsby. So first we're going to start off with just a blank sheet of paper. That's pretty simple what we're going for. I like to write in pen, so I'm going to do a pen. First step, I'm just going to label what the piece of media is that we're working off of. That was completely out of frame. Apologies, but it just says The Great Gatsby. You don't need to see that. Okay. Now we're going to begin with the actual substance of the chart. We're going to begin by writing down our characters' names. It's helpful to write them in quite large letters. I always write in block capitals, that's just my handwriting. You can obviously do something different, but I like the way that it looks in this context, so I'm gonna do it. After you write the names, I also like to draw just a rectangle around them so that it's clear, where the name begins and ends, because for people with more complicated names, like a lot of the Russian novels that I showed in my examples, people can have quite a lot of names, and it's sometimes useful to be able to delineate exactly where that begins and ends. Now, there is no exact place where you should put your characters. I like to kind of chart it out in my mind before putting it down on paper, and then just put characters with similar roles who are closer in terms of their relationships, closer to each other, and, people who may not interact a little bit farther apart, so that, it's pretty clear, like, who's close with who. Okay, now we have all of our characters written out. They're all in boxes, so it's very nice, neat. You can see, you know, kind of near who's with who. Like Myrtle Wilson doesn't really interact with Jordan, so they're kind of far apart on the chart because you don't need them to be too close. But like Daisy and Tom, because they're married, they're a lot closer together. So now we just have our names written out. This is, again, just a basic spread at this point. So what we're going to do now is to actually write down our relationships now. So what we do is going to do an arrow between different people. So Jay and Nick, I'm just going to call them friends for this. And just label it like that. Pretty easy, right? For one-sided relationships, like between Gatsby and Daisy, I tend to just do a one-way arrow, because, you know, Gatsby is in love with Daisy, but Daisy doesn't love him back, necessarily, so just the one-way arrow tends to make more sense in circumstances like this. I think that's about it. That kind of summarizes all the relationships. It defines all the characters. So I really don't think there's anything else that we have to do for this one. So, you know, it's a pretty simple process. Obviously, again, if you have more characters and more complex relationships, the chart is going to be a lot more complicated than this, but I decided to do just a pretty simple, straightforward, somewhat universally known story for the purposes of this instructional. So yeah, you can kind of see that. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you know how to do it yourself now, and you can go forth and create character relationship charts for any and every book that you read and write.